Hello, it's my pleasure to welcome you to another installment in our five-part webinar series presented to you by APHSA in partnership with the Maryland Department of Disabilities. This series will share cutting-edge innovations that demonstrate how services across the country can much more effectively assist young people with disabilities aged 14 through 24 and their families to successfully transition out of K through 12 education into post-secondary education or work. These families interact not only with disability services, but also with our human services and supports, and the innovations to be discussed emerge from a 5-year federally funded model demonstration project called PROMISE. The innovations speak directly to how our agencies can better align and coordinate with other systems to truly improve outcomes for these young people, who are most at risk to face a lifetime of dependency on public benefits. The work of the PROMISE Model Demonstration Project produced significant learnings that are highly relevant to all those who work at the intersection of the many sectors and systems addressing issues of disability, economic and social mobility, education, public health and well-being, and children, youth, and families. The lessons learned are also highly relevant to other whole family frameworks that you're probably using already, such as two-generation and whole family approaches. Since early 2019, APHSA has been partnering with the Maryland Department of Disabilities and the leaders of the 5 other PROMISE projects. We've partnered to engage human services professionals and share approaches and lessons learned from PROMISE and ways to help you explore how to apply these lessons to more efficiently and effectively serve people with disabilities, including those with non-obvious disabilities within the populations that you serve. This webinar series captures the depth of learning and expertise from across the PROMISE sites and is organized into important topical areas. Each webinar will also provide a number of tools and resources to help you move the needle in your jurisdiction. We encourage you to watch the whole series and to share it with partners across other sectors and settings. We have 2 presenters today, Jade Gingrich and Ellie Hartman. Jade Ann Gingrich has over 2 decades of experience in state policymaking, starting as Executive Director of the Governor's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities and most recently as Director of Employment Policy for the Maryland Department of Disabilities, the nation's only cabinet-level cross-disability department. And Dr. Hartman served as Project Manager for Wisconsin PROMISE, helping ensure youth and their families enrolled and engaged in Wisconsin PROMISE employment services and supports, field staff implemented treatment with fidelity, project benchmarks were met, and youth and family employment rates increased. Most recently, Dr. Hartman is utilizing her experience and expertise to help build the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development's Workforce Data Integration System. And with that, Jade, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina. And welcome. As you may have heard when you have listened to some of the other series, this is a 5-part series that covers a variety of topics, including an overview, the discussion of engagement and working with families in education, work incentives and benefits counseling, non-obvious disabilities and disclosure, and customized employment as a tool to overcome barriers to work and work-based learning for individuals, not just individuals with disabilities, but individuals with multiple barriers to employment. The key elements of these series are the webinars, as well as tools, templates, resources, and questions and answers that will allow you to have some guided discussions with your teams to think about how to integrate some of these activities into your work. The recommended approach is that you comprise teams of representatives of human services and disability agencies such as vocational rehabilitation, workforce development, and education. And it's an opportunity to think about these activities and how to integrate them into other efforts that may already be underway in your state, such as 2Gen, TANF state plans, and others. The materials will be posted to www.mdtransitions.org with a link to the APHSA resources. PROMISE was a large-scale national research with over 13,000 youth on SSI and their families recruited to improve educational and employment outcomes. We enjoyed over 80% engagement rate across all of the sites. So when we talk about our engagement strategies, they certainly have the basis in some lived experience. The sites included California, Maryland, Arkansas, Wisconsin, Aspire, which was a collaboration between Colorado, Arizona, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, and led by Utah, as well as New York State. The demographics included significantly high representation of minorities in each site, whether it be Blacks, Hispanics, or in the case of Aspire, Native Americans. So let's talk a little bit about education, because education is a really key element to improving the secondary, post-secondary, and employment outcomes for all youth, particularly youth with disabilities. And we learned quite a bit during Promise about the experience of youth on SSI and education. The first of which is that not all students who are on SSI receive special education services. But those that do have special education services have something called an Individuals Education Program, or an IEP, which is reviewed annually. It's important that parents be supported to attend these IEP meetings, and youth should also be encouraged to participate. A lot of discussion occurs, and they're really intended to help the student be successful in education, although sometimes it's viewed as a negative opportunity. Helping families and youth to understand the benefits of participation can be really, really critical in ensuring and improving their secondary and post-secondary outcomes. In addition, starting at age 16, or in some states 14, the IEP is required to include a transition plan. This is a really critical opportunity to learn about the opportunities for work experiences and training that are available to them prior to school exit, as well as what options the youth has after they leave school. It's really critical that you participate and support the families and youth to participate, to learn about and to engage in those opportunities, because as we have demonstrated under Promise, they will improve the outcomes. It's important to also remind families of youth that are on SSI that the youth will have a redetermination at age 18, and they may lose eligibility SSI. So engaging in these transition planning and work experiences take on increased importance. Our benefits counseling and work incentives presentation talk a little bit more about the age 18 redetermination and how that eligibility changes and the impact, if you'd like to learn more about that. It's also important that all youth with disabilities who are on SSI take advantage of the pre-employment transition services. They're provided through vocational rehabilitation in each state, and these are critical access and opportunities for students to engage in different activities. Our customized employment webinar talks a little bit more about those services, and they are available at no cost to any youth with a disability. To locate your state vocational rehabilitation, you can go to askjan.org, and the link is there and also included on the landing page, or you can go to rsa.ed.gov and search about your state. And we encourage you to also check out our Webinar 5, which has more information on pre-employment transition services and eligibility. We've developed a fact sheet that will help you and your teams understand how schools support students with disabilities, that you can then support parents and youth to get the maximum benefits from education and to be able to advocate on behalf of their son or daughter. Schools report a large number of families, particularly those in poverty, face challenges to participating in school-related meetings and ultimately do not engage in those meetings and other opportunities. So you and your team can also look at how to facilitate that engagement or get consent to attend the meetings, which could positively impact the students' educational outcomes and ensure they exit school linked to post-school services that will ultimately lead them to employment. Because this can be a complex area, there are parent training and information centers at every single state, and their purpose is to provide free information and training to families of kids from birth to age 26 who have a disability. They can also provide information and training to workers supporting families of kids with disabilities and poverty, as well as kids in foster care with disabilities. To find the Parent Training Center in your area, please visit the link below. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Wisconsin Promise.
Thank you, Jade. So to talk about that family engagement piece, engaging with youth transition services, whether it's through schools, through vocational rehabilitation, or through your own program, family engagement is a key component. And this is something we saw not only in the design of Promise, but also through the implementation. the importance of family engagement became readily apparent from the moment we started recruiting and enrolling youth and family participants into the project, up through the implementation of the project in engaging both the youth and the family members with the project. And so I wanted to talk today about those family engagement pieces and how our approach really evolved through Wisconsin Promise. Wisconsin Promise is unique in that we aimed not only to work with the youth, but the full family. So it was a full family approach. And really talking through how did that work, because a lot of programs focus on the individual who is eligible. And like I said, that evolved over time. So we started first by identifying and connecting youth and families who were eligible to the program. As Jade said, we enrolled over 13,000 youth and families across the country. And to do that, that meant each state had to enroll at least 2,000 youth and their families. And we had to do so between around a 2-year period. So we started in April 2014 to April 2016. And the youth needed to be receiving supplemental security income, which means they had a Social Security disability determination. And their family income needed to be deemed low enough. Youth were 14, 15, or 16 when they first enrolled, and we continued to work with them throughout to the end of the project, even as they got older and even if they were no longer eligible for SSI. But they needed to be receiving SSI at the time of enrollment. And so those two pieces needed to be true. So they were engaged with disability systems, receiving SSI and Medicaid, but also, as I mentioned, their family income needed to be deemed low enough. So a lot of families were struggling with poverty-related issues as well. So connecting to youth and families was super important, not only to enroll them in the project, but to continue to engage them in the project. At the same time, at federal and state levels, it was understood that early intervention with transition-age youth is very important. And so in 2014, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act was passed and was started to be implemented. And with that, there was more of a focus on transition-age youth, so teenagers through young adulthood. In addition, schools were looking to improve the transition process as well. In Wisconsin specifically, our individual education programs, or IEPs, were becoming college and career ready IEPs. As Jade mentioned, post-secondary transition plans are required starting by age 16. In Wisconsin, it does start at age 14. And in addition, Wisconsin was looking to develop academic career plans starting in 6th grade for all youth. This wasn't a disability-specific initiative, but it starts at 6th grade for all youth, and students with disabilities are to be included in academic career planning. In addition, when we're looking at engaging with youth and families through schools, knowing that we have allies through the school social workers, school nurses, and school homeless liaisons as well. So a lot of connection engagement pieces that we needed to be aware of in this changing environment. Even with all that happening, we found quickly as we were recruiting and enrolling youth at a slower rate than we thought we would, that we really needed to look towards the community and really look at what we were called Promise Intake Coordinators, who helped us do community networking and connecting with youth and families. So I'm going to talk through the program outreach process in Wisconsin. As I mentioned, we connected with schools, and schools actually mailed out announcements to individual youth and families when the youth is receiving disability services or had an IEP. We also connected through child welfare case managers, and there was about 1,500 youth that were eligible for the project who were also in child welfare. Quite a few, actually more than we anticipated. And so we connected directly through their case managers. On the flip side, remember, youth receiving SSI have a disability determination from Social Security. We anticipated a large number of youth being engaged in our mental health and long-term care systems. And while we did see a small number, about 50 youth in our mental health wraparound services and about 400 youth in long-term care system, that was actually less of an overlap than what we saw with the child welfare system, which really told us a lot about the population and the connection our youth and families were having to existing services and supports. Maybe they weren't as connected to our state systems and supports as we thought. So for that reason, we started doing outreach through other means. We did mailings through public service announcements, through the Milwaukee Hunger Task Force and the Milwaukee Housing Authority. A good number of our youth who were eligible were in urban areas, especially the Milwaukee area. And that outreach seemed really to help connect to our youth and families. So that was working well. And then we also tried some other strategies. Okay, all youth are receiving SSI. Let's connect through the local Social Security offices. We also tried connecting through juvenile justice programs, even clinics and hospitals when youth came in for their well check appointments. And then our Wisconsin Works, or W2, our Wisconsin TANF program, we did some connection through there, although later we found out only 4% of our participants were receiving W2. And I wanted to talk about this real quick because what we found were youth receiving SSI, that was really the check, the money, the income that families were dependent on. There's not an employment requirement with youth SSI. And the youth had disability-related needs, and a lot of families were depending on that income not only for the youth but for the full family. Whereas W-2 has employment-specific requirements, and so the folks on W-2 weren't the same as families receiving, having an individual receiving SSI. There wasn't as much of an overlap between those two groups as we thought, yet the poverty-related issues was similar across those families, and so it has gotten us to think, okay, how can we work better across our disability and poverty programs so we are serving populations that they're not falling through the cracks, that we're connecting them with needed services and supports, the mental health, the long-term care, the family income-related and food and housing-related supports. How are we better connecting the dots across our systems and supports? Because what we were finding with our SSI youth and their family members is a lot of them are falling through the cracks. Yes, they had the benefit through SSI. The youth was receiving health care through the Medicaid, but what about the other family members? And that's not a lot of money for a family to be trying to survive on. And so really opened our eyes to how do we better engage families into our services and systems, whether it be through schools, mental health, long-term care, rehab, other employment and training programs, or our poverty-related programs. So as we're contemplating all this, we still need to recruit and enroll enough youth into Promise. And so we continued our efforts, but realized we really needed to do better community outreach. And so with our community outreach, Yes, we had, as Jade mentioned, our parent training center in Wisconsin. It's called Wisconsin Family Assistance Center for Education, Training, and Support, or Wisconsin Facets. We also have a statewide parent educator initiative, or WISPE, and a Parent-to-Parent of Wisconsin. Those parent groups were helpful. In addition to Facets, we also have Alianza, which is a Spanish-speaking parent group as well. And those traditional family engagement groups were helpful, but we found quickly that they weren't necessarily connecting to youth receiving SSI and their families. They were to some extent, but not as much as we were hoping, and so we still needed to connect to youth and families. So we started looking through connection through community programs, such as the Wisconsin Community Action Programs, and just local programs, the YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, community centers and churches, and then looking at specific programs in communities. So for example, in Milwaukee, they had Our Next Generation, the Running Rebels, Urban Underground. How do we connect through them? And we have Promise Intake coordinators who were individuals in communities helping us knock on doors, create community events that would talk to youth and families who are eligible about, okay, this is Promise, this is why it's a good thing, you know me from the community, here's why it would be helpful to sign up. And we started to see our numbers increase, especially when those the individuals in the community were helping with those recruitment and enrollment efforts. So who signed up? We did, at the end of the day, get over 2,000 youth and families enrolled in Promise. We met our Wisconsin Promise. We met our goal, as did the other states, as Jade mentioned earlier on. And so who enrolled? What did the youth look like? What were their characteristics? So looking at primary disability, I think we came in thinking a lot of youth receiving SSI are going to have more of what we consider intellectual or developmental disabilities. And about a little less than 30% of youth did report that as a primary disability. But we had even more youth with reported mental health or behavioral disability, 34%. Another 25% other, this was like speech and language, ADHD, other types of disabilities, and then a smaller percentage with more physical and long-term care disabilities. So that changed what we thought of the makeup of this group of youth receiving SSI and their families, and helped really look at what partners would help with engagement, including family engagement. Looking at race and ethnicity, yes, this is Wisconsin numbers. Almost half our youth, 49%, were African American. This percentage was higher in Milwaukee at 78%. White youth, 36%, a third of our youth, a little over, 8% in Milwaukee area. Hispanic youth, about 10, 11% statewide. And most were English speaking, although we had quite a few family members who spoke Spanish or Hmong or some other languages such as Karen. And so even though the majority spoke English, we definitely needed to make sure we addressed language-related barriers as well. 2/3 of our youth were male, and this was consistent across all the states. And then looking at the households, most youth were coming from single-parent households, 2/3, and that was up to 77% in the Milwaukee area. And most were low income. 70% had less than $25,000 a year of income. This is both paid and unpaid income, so from benefits and from work. And that was up to 75% in Milwaukee. I keep mentioning Milwaukee. We definitely had more youth eligible and enrolled in our urban areas, especially the Milwaukee area. But I do want to say we were enrolled statewide. So every county in the state had youth and family members enrolled. So we worked in urban areas, suburban areas, and rural areas of the state. So I mentioned we enrolled our youth. They were 14, 15, and 16 receiving SSI, enrolled them, and also enrolled their family members. This is a research demonstration project. So half received services as usual, and then the other half received the Wisconsin Promise services. And the way we set it up in Wisconsin was very similar to how other states set it up, but also had its own flavor. So in Wisconsin, the lead agency was vocational rehabilitation, but as with all the states, it was really important to have interagency collaboration, and we did this through resource teams, where we collaborated with the schools, with long-term care, mental health, juvenile justice, child welfare, whoever made sense for that youth and family team. And then our core services were employment services. So our goal was really to increase that the youth education, employment, and financial self-sufficiency. Not only the youths, but the families. So employment services was our key, right? And in those services, our goal was at least one paid job, preferably two, while still in high school. And then also helping family members connect to employment services. To do that, we really needed to connect them to a work incentive benefits counselor. Okay, how does work impact benefits? How can we maximize income and assets and increase, and then look at that financial self-sufficiency. So we added in financial coaching for that. Looking at the job, ensuring that they have those soft skills or those social skills that help increase getting a job and keeping a job. So that was a key component. And then really looking at the empowerment of youth and families. It's not about doing for the youth and families. It's really listening to what the youth and families wanted to do and how they wanted to get there, and to empower them to do that. Because I want to emphasize that all the youth and families we worked with had skills and abilities that they could bring to their communities, that they could bring to their jobs, that were really of a benefit, really could help out our local workforce. And we needed to recognize their skills and abilities, and that they had a desire to contribute, each and every one of them, to their communities, and we were underutilizing their skills and their abilities because sometimes we look too much at the needs and the wants and what is needed for survival, and we don't recognize what they're bringing, the skills and abilities they bring to our communities, to make our communities better, to make our communities more whole. And that was a huge part of Promise, to look at both the youth and the family and what they bring and how they can make our communities better through community connections, but also through the work that they can do at local jobs. And so that was a big piece, this family and self-advocacy training, helping them recognize what they bring to the table and help them to move forward with their goals was a big piece. And that's where I'm going to emphasize. When we're talking about family engagement, a huge piece of that is recognizing what the youth and the families bring to the table. And recognizing they know the youth the best, right? They bring expertise to the table, and if we don't recognize that expertise, it's really hard to get that engagement, right? Recognizing that expertise and what they bring really helps with that engagement, and then also recognize where they're coming from and the other pieces in their lives to really help navigate systems, not only with their goals in mind, but also with their daily lives in mind as we're moving forward. And then we also added some health promotion to start to round out a whole youth, a whole family approach. All right. So in the beginning, we were going to utilize a family training program that we've used in other grants. in what we called our Let's Get to Work grant. We did this family training through schools. That grant was really focused through schools. We had a select schools set up, and we utilized this training, and we saw increased knowledge around transition services and systems, increased use of those services and systems, and it really worked well in that grant. So we're going to use the same approach. Okay, we're going to train families. We're going to train them what's possible. We're going to train them in the services available, and this is going to work great. Well, what we found quickly is folks really weren't wanting to go to these random trainings. You're new to this project. You're going to go to training. You're going to talk to other people that you don't necessarily know yet about your family. We also had financial training, same kind of results, low attendance, and things were happening in the families' lives. So we set up one training. We're just going to have about 12 families show up, nice size training, not too big, not too small. And we had like 1 or 2 families show up. Well, other families, one family didn't come because another member of their family got shot. Another family didn't show up because the mom was taking care of an infant of one of her other kids, which we would have welcomed mom and infant to the class, like, come along, let's chat, let's talk, that's okay. But she didn't know us. She didn't feel comfortable with that. And so we found we needed to better connect with families through more community engagement. Before we expected them to come to these trainings, we needed to find a way to make that community, that peer-to-peer connection. So we transformed our model of training to a family peer support model. And what we ended up doing is we hired Wisconsin Promise Family Advocates, individuals who lived in the community, who were part of the community, who could work one-on-one with families. They could do the same things as the training would do, but at an individualized level, really meet the family where they're at, and then help them identify and navigate the supports that they need now. And then that would lead to future. And then increase expectations of what is possible around work, on integration, on increased independence, on daily living. They could also help youth with their self-advocacy, so that was an online course we had in Wisconsin, and some youth actually went through it, but a lot of youth weren't engaging with this online system, and so that brought more of a family support to help get that, help them through that course with someone to support them through there. Again, the important piece was that one-on-one family support helped when and where the families were at. And once they developed that, then they could start connecting families in regions to connect and learn together. But it was really important to do that connection on a one-to-one level. And at first, some people would think, oh, that's much more expensive, each and every family. But I will tell you, it is expensive to set up a training and no one to show up and only have 1 or 2 families show up. It's much more efficient to connect with families one-on-one than it is to try to develop these trainings and then doing all the advertising and then only get a couple families, and you're only engaging with 1 to 2 families at a time anyway. So we found it actually not only more effective but more efficient to have family advocates. So our family advocates, like I said, these are community members. They were hired for their lived experience, and they worked with a coach to help fill that content. So they might not have the degree behind their name, but they had a coach to help connect them to the information they needed to support families, but really were there for that peer-to-peer support. And then a lot of them were family members of a youth with a disability. We had one family advocate who was bilingual, which was really important, especially for our Spanish-speaking families. They were peers of the Promise participants. Actually, 5 of our 10 family advocates were Promise parents themselves. And they utilized flexible schedules. They were available evenings and weekends. They were flexible where they met. So our Promise staff could be flexible where they met in the community. So they met at libraries, fast food restaurants, out in the community at the school. The difference with the family advocates is they could also meet within the home. And so that gave them one more location to meet with the families. And that helped a lot too. Our family advocates had cultural competence, especially considering they're living in the community. That helps. That experience and empathy helped a lot. And then not only did they have the coaching, but they also had the training in trauma-informed care, which all our Promise staff had training in, and motivational interviewing. Also, all our staff had training in that. And the motivational interviewing really addresses when folks are resistant to change, right? So you're living, surviving day to day. Now you're telling me that if I get this job, this is going to change, or and part of me wants to do that. And yes, that's why I signed up for this project. But part of me is like, wait a minute, this is going to screw up my benefits, or how am I going to attend to other needs? What the balance of everything is gonna be shifted. And so the motivational interviewing really looks at, okay, what are your goals, desires? You signed up for a reason. And then how do you want to get there? And really, it's listening to the individual and help developing a plan around the desires of the individual versus saying, okay, here, I'm the expert. If you want to do this, this is how you get there. And then when they try to do that and it doesn't work, or or they might come up with a lot of reasons why they can't do that. Instead, with motivational interviewing, it's really looking at that motivation of the individual and moving with that versus trying to create that motivation outside of the desires of that individual. And there's a whole class and training around that, and I'm oversimplifying it, but all our staff, including our family advocates, were trained in both trauma-informed care and motivational interviewing, which really helped our families move forward in the process and provided an environment that was trauma-informed. So not only through cultural and empathy pieces, but also ensuring it was a safe place for folks that may have been living through trauma. So how do family advocates see themselves? And this slide has pictures of the family advocates with the youth and the families. And they saw themselves as a team facilitator, a connector, a mediator, a teacher, a mentor, a supporter, cheerleader. Basically, they said, I am anything they need me to be, and they were very flexible depending on the family needs. So we had over 958 families referred to family advocacy. This is out of our 1,000 plus youth and families. And they did a lot with our families. So at the end of the day, they totaled over 27,000 total activities between that family advocate and the family, which averaged almost 30 activities per family. This includes attempts to contact. Over 9,000 total service hours, averaging 10 hours per family. Lots of travel because they were coming to the families. And at the end of the day, almost 600 met with a family advocate. Not all families met with a family advocate. Some, went through the program without that additional support, and they were fine. So different supports for each youth and family makes a lot of sense. But quite a few, more than half, almost 60% met with that family advocate. And most of those who met with a family advocate actually completed what we call their family advocacy modules. And those were the modules that talked about the possibilities of youth, being person-centered with the youth, and then the transition services and how to navigate them. And that's important because those who completed those services showed better outcomes overall, and I'll show that in a little bit. So they talked a lot. The biggest piece was that relationship building, really getting youth and families comfortable with the services, but really taking that time to understand where the youth and families are at so you can better build that plan with the youth and family on how to move forward. So they not only did relationship building with those engaged in the project, but they also helped us connect to youth and families that were not engaged in the project and helped connect them back into the project. Jade mentioned we had 80% engagement in this project. That's because we worked hard in connecting youth and families back to the project. We didn't give up on families. We didn't say, okay, you didn't do X, Y, and Z, that, you've made your decision. No, we continued to connect. There's a reason they signed up for the project. There was something that they wanted to get out of the project, and we wanted to connect with the youth and families to really find out what that piece was and how we could help. A lot helping with that self-advocacy training, and then combined services as well, also helping with those basic needs, housing, food, clothing, transportation. How do we help connect them to that? A lot of connecting to our community action programs, our housing, our food programs in our local communities. Also help with individual education programs. So we're talking about engagement with schools. Jade mentioned some of our families were disconnected with schools, in fact, to the point that some were homeschooling because they were just frustrated with the local school and really not getting that connection with the local school. And it was often how do we see eye to eye, the school and the family family advocate being a community member but also part of this project that was connected with school systems was able to be that liaison sometimes to help make that connection and help rebuild that relationship between the youth and the family, the youth, family, and the school. Also talked about employment barriers and concerns, technology check-ins. We used iPads with all our families. We had the online learning, all these pieces. And so that technology piece, walking through that technology was important. We actually had an individual who could help youth and families with that technology. So it wasn't necessarily that family advocate, but connecting to someone who can help youth and families with that technology in a youth and parent-friendly way, which is, in today's world, becoming more and more important. And then creating a positive description, so really looking at those positive attributes of the youth and the family members, what they bring to the community, what they bring to work, and identifying those interests. As I said before, it's not only about engagement, but also empowerment. And to do empowerment, you need to recognize not only as the professional, but also the individual youth and family members need to recognize what folks are bringing to the table, and that changes the possibilities. So I focused in on that family advocate piece, and that was one of the key pieces for us to see these outcomes. So we saw at the end of September 2018, when we ended services, that our group that received services as usual, just over half, 57%, had some kind of paid employment from that April 2014 to September 2018. Our treatment group, that was 10 percentage points higher at 67%. And in fact, we continue to look at not only any employment, but UI wages, the amount youth are earning past Wisconsin Promise, and we are seeing that the treatment youth continue to earn more than our control youth, the youth in usual services. And in fact, the youth in usual services who never connected to voc rehab had even lower employment rates. We also found a small number, as of September 2018, some of our youth were still in high school, so youth are still early in their careers, right? Very, very early. but already 78 or 8% of Promise Youth were earning substantial gainful activity. That means they were earning enough to work off of benefits. And then, so what was the impact of the Family Advocate? Of those who completed those family advocacy modules, their employment rate was actually even higher than we saw in treatment overall. Their employment rate was up to 75%. So those family advocacy modules helped with employment planning for families, overcoming the barriers to employment, and transitioning to adulthood. And I actually have a link here, beforeage18.org/family-advocacy-training. And that actually gives you a link to the modules, online modules that we used for those trainings. So those are actually available for public use online. So folks are welcome to those. There might be some Wisconsin-specific information in there, but a lot of it would still be relevant to youth and families, talking about the empowerment and transition services are very similar across states, although not all the same. But some of those pieces would be relevant even outside of Wisconsin. So at the end of September 2018, we still had some opportunities to continue to work with youth and families in a new way. So from October 2018 to September 2019, we worked with youth and families on community leadership projects. And this is part of our empowerment. Youth and family members started to come up with community projects to increase the employment of youth with disabilities in their own communities. So we had 97 youth and families members who signed up. 87 had a goal identified, and then they did projects around community integration, employer outreach, career exploration, school and training, transportation, a ton of things related to what was needed. And so they were becoming the change makers in their community. So for example, real simple things sometimes where one youth was helping other youth in her school apply for apprenticeship programs that were available. One family was helping with transportation. They talked to the local cab company and negotiated rides to and from work for youth with disabilities. So there were a variety of different projects, and those just a couple of them. But youth and families were really becoming empowered not only in their own lives, but in other lives around them. So looking towards, okay, how do we keep materials, our efforts that we did in Promise moving forward? We have some materials that can help. So what we really found is as we think about sustainability is better targeted outreach and engagement with diverse students receiving SSI through interagency collaboration can improve student engagement in services and ultimately improve their post-secondary outcomes. Family engagement leads to empowerment. So that increases the use of services and systems, improves the outcomes, which in turn reduces the cost over long term because of a reduced reliance on public benefits and an increase in tax revenue. And we actually have a research study, a cost-benefit analysis we did in this area. I provide a link. It's through the Journal of Vocational Rehabilitation. They did a special issue on Promise. And those articles are actually free for the public to access. So if you're interested in seeing them, that cost-benefit analysis, that is available. If you go to promisewi.com/success, a list of that article and other articles and other resources are available on that link. We have other resources. I mentioned the beforeage18.org website. That's beforeage spelled out 18.org. And we have what's called the Transition Guide, and that actually brought together all the resources we used in Promise, the local resources that we connected through Promise, but that would continue to be available after Promise. This is a Wisconsin-specific guide, but I know, for example, Maryland developed a similar guide, and other states could as well. And it's really an overview, but a real nice piece pulling all the different resources in one easy-to-use guide. And in addition, at the beforeage18.org site, we also have those family advocacy modules I mentioned earlier, and the self-advocacy modules, I mentioned those were online, those are available on that website as well. All right, so I'm telling you all this, but really the story is better told with from the viewpoint of the families. And so this is one example, the Clemens and Clarks. They're more in the rural parts of Wisconsin, and they can share what this all meant to them.
Like when I was a little baby, I had a whole bunch of seizures.
If they have spent their entire lives being told they couldn't do stuff, that is their mantra. That's what they believe.
Some kids with disabilities where they get teased and all that, where we can do a lot more stuff and working.
When you're living in a home where you don't see other people working, it becomes a foreign concept to you.
So when you talk about bringing social services in to make a difference and you want to make a change, you have to look at the whole. You can't just look at the parts. Wisconsin Promise is a family systems approach to helping families find, maintain, and advance employment. What's critical about it is that it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach. It connects people to resources. It gives them hope.
Have you thought about what you might want to do after high school?
Going to college for firefighter.
I don't think he understood that there was other kids out there with his disability until the Promise program came along.
Through all our interviews and our meetings, he talked about wanting to work with people. Tony currently works at Nielsen's here in town.
He came on, he had a helper with him, caught on really quick.
My favorite is helping people. I learn new things every single time.
He knows the store pretty much inside out. He's come out of his shell a little bit more.
After his siblings saw the success that he was having, I slowly started working with other siblings within the family. Sydney was a delight to work with, and we immediately found employment at Denny's, and they hired her on the spot.
Hello, I'm Sydney.
They've got kids with income, they've got kids with futures, and they know what resources are out there.
Just one? Yes.
Table or room?
I'll move.
Promise helped out to get me started back into college. It really gave me that chance to put all the excuses aside.
You know that it's generational change that's occurring because they've been lifted and supported, and they know that I'm walking alongside them.
Started my own company, set a foundation to start the growth of a legacy for our family. Just gotta roll with it sometimes, you know. You know, Tony is really big into wanting to help with the company and want to see it grow.
It's my most favorite is just going with him and going on tours, watching the lights and hooking up the cars.
Through DDRM Promise, we were able to get him and his siblings into the driver's training program.
When I get my license, I'm thinking of doing towing until I go to college.
Working in the community and being independent has really helped him mature.
Tony, trying to help shape him into adulthood, kind of helped us. That's the best part about it. They never quit. That kind of gave us encouragement never to quit.
Thank you, Wisconsin Promise.
I won't bite too bad on you.
So some engagement best practices that teams might want to consider. The highly intensive approaches work best, whether in-person contacts or individualized approaches. Experienced and persistent staff, particularly experienced working in the field of human services, education, and social work. And that persistence is really, really key, as well as maintaining constant contact with participants. In-person is best, but calls, text, and cards are also effective. Building trust with the youth and families is really, really crucial, as well as meeting in a place that's convenient for the youth and the student, the home, the school, the public library. In Maryland, we required that they map the communities to identify places that they could meet with teams. And follow through. Do what you say you're going to do in a timely way. Building that sense of trust, it's important to deliver and to be able to demonstrate that you can actually assist them with some of the issues that they're experiencing. Unpacking the toolkit. Amongst the things in the toolkit for this particular webinar is a document about the IEP, the Individualized Education Program, the benefits, some additional resources, and how to utilize it to communicate to families and youth about the benefits and importance, if they have an IEP, of participating in those annual meetings. There's also a fact sheet on engagement tips, as well as an example of an engagement postcard that was utilized. A family youth goal template, discussing with families and youth what their goals are and figuring out how to help them get started on those goals is a really important strengths-based positive first step to building those relationships. In addition, there are resources such as where to get more information and training, as well as questions that will help you and your team stimulate state and local discussions to again think about what tools or aspects of these various practices that worked under Maryland Promise might be integrated into your activities. Again, all of these resources will be available at www.mdtransitions.org with a link to APHSA. Finally, I'd like to express my appreciation to APHSA, the Conference Edge staff, and the Maryland team, as well as my co-presenter, Ellie Hartman. Thank you all for joining us today.